Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and in today's lessons, we're going to be exploring patterns and echoes and connections throughout the book of James. And we actually have a lot to cover, so we're just going to explain the logic of our trajectory before we get started. We approach it in the order they appear. Everything we're going to cover today spans in the range of the first chapter, and then we connect it to a verse which comes in a later chapter, and we're going to approach it in that order. And if we have enough time, we'll explore the 3 verses in the second chapter that explore the relationship between faith and works. But we're going to get right started with the first chapter, verses 2 and 4. My brothers, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the proving of your faith works endurance, and let endurance have a perfect work, so that you be perfect and complete, lacking in naught. So this is at face value an odd perspective to take to trials, because trials are not pleasant. Trials cause us pain, but it's in the furnace of affliction where quality Christians are made. So it is necessary and essential, in fact, for us to enter into trials, because if our faith isn't put to the test, it's not going to be very strong. It's certainly not going to be strong enough to have the faith in the grace of our salvation. In the process of refining our faith, we develop endurance, which is an essential quality of enduring to the end. That is of salvific significance. And this endurance will be, I think, perfect, belittles the thing he's really trying to communicate. It's not a instant perfection, but it's a process of perfection, which begins here and now. We can taste and experience the eternal life which awaits us here on earth, and why wouldn't we? And this is going to satisfy you so that you'll lack not. Then in the 5th chapter, we read of an individual example of this trait of endurance, Job, the figure from the Old Testament, of whom James writes, See, we count those blessed who endure. You have heard of the endurance of Job and saw the purpose of Yahweh, that he is very sympathetic and compassionate. So the story of Job is an Old Testament theodicy, which explores the relationship of the suffering to the righteous. And Job was an upright, perfect man, a righteous man, one of the only 2 or 3 characters to be described as perfect and righteous. I think Noah and maybe Daniel might be the other one. But he is a model of endurance because he lost it all. He lost it all suddenly. He lost all his entire his 10 children. House collapsed on them after all his livestock and possessions had been taken by Sabian and other nomadic raiders. And then Satan sends us terrible skin affliction, boils all over him, and he struggles to make sense of it all, but he does endure with his faith and his integrity intact, and as such exists as a model that we New Testament saints can safely emulate, because any trial which comes our way is not going to be near as extreme in scope or dimension as that which was visited upon Job. 5th verse of the 1st chapter. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask Elohim, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it shall be given to him. So wisdom is not an unrighteous request. Yahweh wants us to have wisdom, or Elohim wants us to have the wisdom we need to build the life we are called to build on the earth. And wisdom is described as, if knowledge is dissecting the puzzle pieces, wisdom is the ability to put it all together. It's the ability to make sense of it all. It's the ability to connect every fact within the webs of fact, which collectively comprise a truth. And because it is his will that we be wise, he will answer that request and accommodate us generously and liberally. So he'll give us all the wisdom we need and then some. This is a request he will not deny. And then he speaks also of wisdom, differentiating between the worldly and the carnal. So he establishes the fact that wisdom is never further from a prayer away in the 1st chapter. And then in the 3rd chapter, he differentiates and defines the carnal and demonic worldly wisdom from that which ascends from above and is heavenly and from on high. So beginning in the 15th verse, this is not the wisdom coming down from above, but it is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. Earthly, unspiritual, demonic. Those are 3 descriptions you want to avoid if you are holding something as the model or reality of wisdom. So demonic forces, demons, and sin distort the mind. It cannot function as it should, and it traps your eyes to the things of the earth which are unspiritual. It reduces us to carnal creatures, beasts of our own nature. For where jealousy and self-seeking are, there confusion in every foul deed. So envy, jealousy is not necessarily a sin, but any envy is invariably a sin. In self, the seeking after self, the looking after your own self-interest, look out for number one, don't worry about anyone else philosophy, actually distorts the priority and proper priorities and induces confusion, and it leads to deteriorated behavior. So how we think determines how we behave. If we are governed and guided by the demonic wisdom or the worldly or that which is carnal, we're going to find ourselves in dangerous territory, but the wisdom we need is never more than a prayer away. If we remember James 5, if in the unlikely circumstance we find ourselves succumbing to wisdom that is demonic or worldly, is a more realistic expectation for a lot of us. But the wisdom from above is first clean, then peaceable, gentle, ready to obey, filled with compassion and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. So the waging of peace actually exhausts more wisdom than the waging of war. The waging of war is the easy way out, but the waging of peace, it requires more diplomacy, more subtle, and more tact and more wisdom. And it's wise to be gentle. You don't want to live by the sword and die by the sword. Obedience and wisdom. Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, the conclusion of the meaning of life is not the pursuit of wisdom or wealth or anything else, but obedience to what we know. So nowhere are we commanded or told in this book that we will believe everything, but that we will understand everything. We are told to believe everything and accept it by faith. And mercy and compassion and good fruits, we will know the wise person and the quality of their teacher and ministry by the fruits that they bear. And and without partiality, that means without bias or prejudice. It evaluates everything on the whole, unpersuaded or unmoved or uncompromised by the wealth or poverty of the one whose affairs you are imposing justice on or judgment on. And without hypocrisy, hypocrisy is the one thing that the world likes to point and laugh at us, so we are to avoid even the hint of hypocrisy. But at the same time, I don't want to encourage anyone to deny the claim. Every Christian is a hypocrite. We embrace and embody and express the literally loftiest moral principles and ideals beyond anyone's capacity to fulfill, but the victory is not ours, or it belongs to us, but the victory came through the one who is able to do what we could not. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. So we plant peace, we can expect the harvest of peace. So wherever we go, we are to bring peace. That is a spirit of wisdom from on high, to be a peacemaker wherever we go, wherever we are, and the fruit of peace is sweet. Verses 1, 6 through 8. Wrong book. But he should ask in faith, not doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. So this is connected to the verse we earlier read. The request for wisdom, the prayer for wisdom will not be denied. But we are told what to ask for, and now we are told and what we can expect when we ask for it. He will provide liberally, generously. He will not reproach you for such a righteous prayer, and it will be given to you all that you need and then some. But we are told how to ask in the 6th verse. But he should ask in faith. So faith is the power which makes the wisdom manifest, not doubting. So if we have an element of the doubt that it's not his will that we be wise, that's going to set us off course and without a compass. And the element of doubt is likened to an aquatic analogy of the wave of the sea, which is wholly controlled by the wind, much in the same way that a doubtful man is controlled and governed and guided by his deranged whimsies and fancies. For that man should not think that he shall receive whatever from the master. Whether you think he can ask your prayer or whether you think he can't, you are correct. So if we approach, our attitude will our outlook will determine the outcome. So when we limit him with our doubts, then we limit his power in our lives. But when we make him alive and exalt him in faith, then he can just do anything that we really need done for us. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. So the person who is doubtful is unstable. They have divided loyalties. They have compromised affection. These doubts distort them from their love and loyalty that is owed to God and God alone. And they are like a ping pong ball or a wave of the sea, in that they have no control over the motion they're headed. And that phrase, double-minded man, appears once more in the 8th verse of the 4th chapter. Draw near to Elohim, and he shall draw near to you. Cleanse hands, you sinner, and cleanse hearts, you double-minded. So this is a spiritual warfare strategy for resisting and overcoming the Satan. And the positive, what we have to do is resist. That's the negative, and he will flee from us. We read in the previous verse. Now we're told to draw near to Elohim. His presence will give us power and grace and love that we need. And we are to wash our hands. That's the Jewish. James is an Old Testament Jew, and he is instrumental in the bridge between Judaism and Christianity. But the Old Testament Jews would have been accustomed to washing their hands before meals. And cleanse the heart. That's a spiritual cleansing, which is more significant than the physical cleansing. And that's what you have to do if you are double-minded, if you are unstable in all your ways, or find yourself divided in commitment and loyalty and love. Then you are double-minded, and you need to pray for the wisdom to have the singularity of focus and clarity of conviction that wisdom can bring. Verse 115, this is the Romans 3:23 of the book of James. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to death, and sin, when it has been accomplished, brings forth death. So this is the fruit, the process of growth of sinful desire, which when it gives birth, when we act on the impulse. Now the presence of temptation and desire is not sinful. It is only sinful when we act according to our baser natures. And when that happens, we have sin, and the wages of sin is death. So the fruit of sin is not very fruitful at all. It is death, and we witness the growth practice. So it all begins with an impious imagination and unrighteous desire, and when we act on that and give it birth and life, then we give birth to our death by the sin which is conceived from that irresponsibility of not resisting temptation, of which we have the formula to do in the 4th chapter. But we're actually going to read the final verse of this book, the 20th of the 5th chapter. Let him know that he who turns away a sinner from the straying of his way shall save a life from death and cover a great number of sins. So there's that word again, death. And how do we avoid eternal death and spiritual death? Well, we have to stimulate the impetus for repentance, and the lost sinner who is not otherwise inclined to stimulate that impetus on their own. We are in the business of saving sinners, or at least leading to the ones we can. That means we have to intervene and direct their path and their walk back to the way of forgiveness and salvation, and that so their sins are going to be obsolete at the judgment. It doesn't matter how much you sin, the first shall be last and the last shall be first, in Elohim's wise creation and design. Verse 122, and become doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. Now faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God, but Romans 10:14, but faith is actually proven and done in the doing. So there's a such thing as the all talk, no action politician that our president campaigned so successfully against, both in the Republican primary and against his Democratic rivals ever since. There is such a thing as an all talk, no action saint who says the right things but never does the things he says. He does not practice what he preaches. He is a hearer and a reciter, but the doing, not the saying, and the hearing of the law is where our faith is proven and refined. And James, as we already mentioned, was very Jewish for a lot of Christians. Martin Luther particularly belittled his epistle as the epistle of straw, and we'll read the specific passages in the 2nd chapter if we have enough time. But the next place we got to turn to is the 11th verse of the 4th chapter. Brothers, do not speak against one another. He that speaks against a brother and judges his brother speaks against law and judges law. And if you judge law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. So even the existence or activity of judging a brother who is an equal, when you judge someone else, you elevate yourself to their superior. It is not something we should do as a matter of course. It should not be our default state of mind. We know our Christian brothers are struggling with sin, but we want to give them the benefit of the doubt. And if we're judging, we're not doing. The Torah exists as our judge. We do not judge from the Torah, the law, or anything else. That is the divine prerogative. We should be approaching our brothers as equals and giving them a helping hand and not judging them and beating them up no matter what they're going through, because, you know, when someone is sinning, they're getting beaten up and they're going through a lot. So we have to be the ones to open our hands and our hearts and not condemn them or indict them or judge them for what they're going through, as long as they are honest and sincere in their born-again impetus. Verse 120, chapter 1, verse 25. But he that looked into the perfect law, that of liberty, and continues in it, not becoming a hearer that forgets, but a doer of works, this one shall be blessed in his doing. So the law is a perfect model. It is an expression and fulfillment and encapsulation of the will of Yahweh, who is a perfect being, perfect in all his essence, perfect in all his attributes. His perfections bleed into every other facet and element of his existence. And the law is an expression of him. But we Christians are free from the law, at least by the penalty of the law, because that price has been paid for us on the cross. But that does not give us license to persist in license. License is a corrupt distortion and perversion of liberty. It's the satanic counterfeit. So for everything that is of God, there is something of Satan. He is the counterfeit artist who... But again, there's that element of hearing and forget. So if we hear and not do, we're going to forget what we hear, because we're not going to do what we heard and instill it and have that memory, the seed of the memory planted in our mind by the actions. We will have experiential knowledge and not just head intellectual knowledge. The knowledge of this book is not meant to be stored in the head, but to guide and govern the hands and the feet. It is to determine our walks. And verse 3:2, for we all stumble in much. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the entire body. So that word perfect connects it once here, and the measure of perfection is not only in the observance of law, which none of us can obey perfectly. The law was obeyed by Yahshua alone, and because he obeyed the law and fulfilled its function, that is our ticket to salvation. It was his observance of the law and his fulfillment of the law, not our honoring of the law, which procures our salvation. But the third chapter, is the first 10 verses are an extensive detail of the destructive or constructive potentials of the tongue. The tongue is a weapon, and that's going to form what we read about next after we read the 26th verse of the first chapter. If anyone amongst you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is worthless. So religion is a word that even religious people avoid like the plague. It has a negative connotation. Most of the world blames the existence of religion for the most deaths and war, but that's not true, because 20th century atheism has killed more people in all the centuries which preceded it. When you count up the 7 million casualties of Mao, the 30 million casualties of Stalin, and the 10 million casualties of Hitler, all atheist. But to think one is now a religious person will go through the motions. They'll put on airs. They'll give visible demonstrations of faith, which are not sincere, but going through the motions of worship. But when it's all said and done, how we use our tongue can be an act of worship when we devote it to the one who gave it to us, and bless, not curse, as he has blessed us and not cursed us with the power of the tongue. We can nevertheless invite curses with how we abuse it in our exercise and agency. So we don't always choose our words. We don't always think about what we say before we say it, and what a host of evils and plagues that invites into our life. Now to return to the third chapter, verses 5 and 6, then 8. So the tongue is a little member, yet boasts greatly. See how little fire kindles a great forest. So much as a mustard seed of faith can be sufficient for our salvation, everything has a starting point, everything has an origin, and a mustard seed of faith is all that it takes to accomplish our salvation. So too does the tongue bring devastation, ruin, and war in its wake and in its midst. Yet it is a small member, but bodily member, physical member, but it carries weight and substance beyond its minuscule physical size. So there's a lot of explosive potential in the tongue. That's why anyone who disciplines it is likened to a perfect man in the second verse. And the tongue is a fire, the world of unrighteousness. Like a forest among our members, the tongue is placed, the one defiling the entire body, and lighting on fire the course of generations, rolling from the beginning, and in the end is lit of fire to itself. So the tongue and our words have a contagious effect. They literally affect every ear they enter into. Words do have power, and they do have meaning. So when we initiate or reciprocate hostility in our words, that's going to be a world of unrighteousness likened to a fire and its contagious spread. And again, the one member, a single member, all our members have been bought and purchased at the when we become temples of the Ruach Kadesh. We accept the sealing of the spirit and the blood, which accomplishes our crucifixion. But the 8th verse reads, "But no one is able to tame the tongue. It is unruly, evil, filled with deadly poison." So no person who has ever lived has spoken the right word at the right time, in the right pitch, in the right manner, to the right person every way, with the exception of Yahshua, whose half-brother James was. James struggled to believe in his divinity and messianic faith along with all the other brothers in his own lifetime, but became a convinced and convicted and converted Christian post-resurrection, and he was instrumental in the Jerusalem assembly. So we have one more connection from the first chapter, and we're going to cover the faith and works ones in the second chapter, beginning with verse 127. "Clean and undefiled religion before the Elohim and Father is this, to visit the orphans and widows in their affliction, to keep oneself unstained from the world." So earlier he spoke of a defiled religion, a corrupt presentation of religious that the world can judge and use to discredit not only us, but our entire movement and our entire way of life, Christianity. But to have clean and undefiled, that means unspotted, without taint, without guile, without hypocrisy, religion, which is acceptable as such to Elohim the Father, is to be compassionate and concerned for the welfare of the most vulnerable in society. These people exist as a test of our compassion. So if we are not going out of our ways to comfort the bereaved and the poor and the vulnerable and the ones who have lost family and are all alone in the world, then our religion is empty and vain. And to keep oneself unstained from the world. Now, when we succumb to the world and its trappings, which is literally all around us at all times and in all places, we can have a compromised worldview which focuses on self and the things of the world and the items and the treasures of the world. But if we really want to have pure religion, we have to be moved by social justice. I'm reluctant to even use that word because of its political connotation, but there is such a thing as social justice, and that is one of the measures and marks of true religion. And the fourth verse of the 4th chapter, "Adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with Elohim? Whoever therefore intends to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of Elohim." So this connects to the final clause in the final sentence, that about keeping oneself unstained and unsullied from the world. Those who indulge and those who succumb are likened to adulterers and adulterers because their love, loyalty, and affection, when we are Christians, we are wedded to the bride, and as such owe the one we're being married to, exclusive love, loyalty, and devotion. So we become adulterers and adulteresses when we compromise our love, loyalty, affection, and adoration with the world, which is really not worthy of the saint or the one who calls us to transcend the world and overcame the world for us. But anyone who is a friend with the world, now we can, a lot of Christianity is, doesn't measure up to the temptations of the world. They're going with the way of the world, and I say that is precisely the problem. But we don't want to be an enemy of Elohim. We want to be a friend and a servant. So stay away from the world, and your straight and narrow path will be unobstructed. Now we just want to wrap up with the second chapter. These are the verses, the controversial verses, the stimulating verses, which explore the connection and relationship between faith and works. So the 14th verse reads, "My brothers, what use is it for anyone to say he has faith but does not have works? This belief is unable to save him." So once more, the all talk, no action Christian is not going to be fit for salvation. So it's easy to say we have faith, but harder to do. So the fruit, works are not the fruit condition of our salvation, but the fruit thereof. Now, being saved, we naturally respond. We want to spread the message and spread the salvation to every and all in our path, and this cannot be done apart from works. Ergo, our faith must develop and mature and progress in the evangelical process, which begins at home. And the 22nd verse also has something to say about that. "Do you see that the faith was working with his works, and by the works of faith was perfected?" So he uses the example of Abraham, the father, progenitor, and patriarch of the Jewish people, and his sacrifice of Isaac, which is a typological allusion to the sacrifice on the son. I did one on that not too long ago. Corey Johnston, Genesis 22, 1 through 19 in the YouTube search engine. But if Abraham was vindicated by faith, his faith was vindicated by works. And the 26th verse, "For as the body without the spirit is dead, so also is the faith is dead without the works." So our faith is dead and meaningless and pointless and without value or worth if it is does not result in works, if it does not have a visible testimony and expression and something concrete to show for it. If our faith is all talk, then it's going to be as empty as the air on which we talk. But if our faith is enmeshed with the world, now we have to reach out to the world. We have to stay separate from it in sin. We have to draw others into the world. And this is a delicate balancing act. But I do believe the scriptures properly assessed will give us the resources, the equipment, and the knowledge to accomplish that delicate balancing act. That's not the sole aim of communication of James. I hope I did justice to what can be communicated in the patterns and the echoes and the connections between James. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.